When did you feel like you got to financial freedom? I know it's a lot of people
Yeah,
picture it as this like magical moment when for sure you're just set, and I think that's it. I think it's kind of nebulous. But
it
for
is.
you, what was that point then?
Yeah. So when I first heard about financial independence, I was reading Mr. Money Mustache's blog. I think I might have found some of the other early stuff, like Early Retirement Extreme and stuff. And it was like 2011. So it was kind of like right when Pete started blogging. Um, And so I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I'm already in so much debt, but I'm going to try. I could be really frugal. I was good at that. And I was like, well, I'm just going to copy his plan. His plan was that he wanted 600,000 in an index funds account. And that was going to give him like 2,500 a month, somewhere like maybe a little bit more than that. But it was, that was like his
From
early retirement
interest,
plan from dividends. But
dividends. Yeah,
yeah,
got it. Yeah,
yeah. And so I was like, well, I can live on that much money. That sounds like a good plan. I'm just going to copy his plan. Well, fast forward a little bit, I started doing Airbnb and I realized, oh, you can also do cash flow. So me trying to get $600,000 in an account was like the same as trying to get 10 million in an account. It was so much money, I couldn't even fathom it. But then when I started doing these rentals, I realized like, oh, I could have a rental that's making $1,000 a month, and then another rental that's making $1,000 a month, and then I'm almost there, right? So that actually was so much quicker to make happen. And so when I had that point of having two rentals that I was getting a solid 2,500 or more a month, I considered myself retired for the first time. And, that target moves as you kind of get older, or maybe your expenses change. But I've definitely retired many times over now. So I'm pretty good. I'm in a good spot.
yeah. And do you feel like that the timing was just right when you were doing it, or do you feel like it's possible for people who are listening to this who haven't ever bought an Airbnb and they're hearing your story from starting 10 years ago now? Do you think they could start it today and get the same results?
Absolutely. I think they can. So yeah, I like to tell people it's not rocket science. Listening to somebody like me or reading a book gives you like a little bit of a cheat code. You can get there faster than you would if you were just figuring it out yourself. But we can all accomplish this. And I don't feel like it's oversaturated at all. There might be certain markets where there's more competition, but just as you said, if you're renting out a basement, you're actually creating more housing because that wouldn't have been there before, right? It would have just been your empty basement. So I think it's actually a real benefit for certain communities to just be offering more places for people.
Got it. Yeah. And I'm curious from somebody's standpoint who started this in 2012, what are some of the biggest changes that you've seen with Airbnb or with investing in short term or medium term type of rentals over the years? And then as a secondary part of that, what do you think the future is going to be like? You mentioned saturation. Do you think things are going to change and it's going to be a lot different than it is right now?
Well, so the biggest changes, I mean, gosh, you have to think like back when I started, people didn't know what Airbnb was. So you would tell them and they wouldn't know. So it wasn't a part of people's leases that you couldn't do it. It wasn't on cities' radars. So it was just like Wild West. You could do whatever you want. But at that time, it also meant that there weren't enough people using it. So maybe in New York City, it was really busy, but in Boulder, Colorado, it was kind of like sort of worked, but it wasn't really like busy enough. So over the years, I saw it grow a lot. And year over year, you could charge more until a certain point. And then I started seeing regulations come into place. So those were some of the big changes that happened. Now I'm seeing some shifts just with this like potential recession. It seemed like the markets that were the most popular just recently were vacation rental markets that are like tried and true, where it's a beachfront area or it's a national park or something like that. Those were like really popular. But in a recession, when people get scared and don't travel as much, even though they are apt to do like a drive to destination, which makes those safer than owning something in Europe or Hawaii where people have to fly, it's still less safe than something like an urban market. And so this is kind of why the transition to medium-term rentals has been big lately, because urban markets are generally not short-term friendly. But as soon as you got that 30-day gray area, then you're golden. So I find that I lean towards these urban markets a little bit more right now, because I want to make sure that I've got enough traction of guests that are coming to town. So as far as future, I mean, gosh, I don't know what's going to happen. I think the recession is a blip. I don't think it's going to be a 2008 and like a huge thing. So, I think there's definitely room for medium and short-term rentals. And if you can do it legally, where it's your primary residence, you can rent out part of your home, 110%, I would do that, because, that lets you live for free or very, very cheap.
Yeah. So I guess then, are you changing the way you invest? I mean, I guess you kind of mentioned you're primarily investing in urban markets right now.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So, and you said you mentioned in your bio that you kind of transitioned from managing properties to selling properties to people who want a house hack. And I think that, like you mentioned, you mentioned a few benefits of it already. We actually rent out right here a corner of you can see a barn, that barn back there. We rent out just a corner of it that we finish the whole inside of that barn, and we use the vast majority ourselves. We put a weight room in there and my wife's antique shop. We put a little 800 square foot apartment, and that pays for our entire property just from that little 800 square foot apartment. So I think house hacking,
amazing,
in so many, I mean, you can come up with so many different ways to do it, is just one of the best personal finance decisions a person can make. But what type of properties are you, obviously you can't do this remote because it's the house that you have to be living in it. So does it work everywhere? And what type of properties have you seen work the best for someone who wants to get into it?
Well, so the places that have outlawed Airbnb generally are the ones that are going to work really well, right? So they outlawed it because it became a problem. So that happened here in Boulder. I want to say it was like maybe it was 2017 that they outlawed it here. And Boulder is really busy because it's a college town. So there's lots of events happening and lots of students coming to check out the school and their parents visiting. And there's just a lot of traction. So the way that they outlawed it here is that they said it has to be your primary residence at least 6 months of the time. So with that, we rent out our place that is our primary residence. So we have a 3-bedroom townhome that I'm sitting in right now. And this place, our mortgage is about $2,200. And so we make a point to be gone at exactly 6 months. Like we're almost to the letter there. And the way that we're out of our house is that we do a lot of pet sitting. And that's gotten like much more sophisticated now with an app and everything, where you can figure out where you want to stay and travel for free. So that's how we do it. And last year, our place made $40,000. And so our mortgage was only $24,000. And so then the rest of it was profit and travel and everything. So that's a great way to look at it, is like, if you live in a town already with a lot of demand, if there's already regulations in place, you can probably tell that there would be some good demand there. But the best way to look is to look on AirDNA. I don't know if you use that too often, but it can give you some predictions of like what a place can make and what the ones around you are making.
And so could you also do like a 2-unit property where, sorry, we have a motorcycle driving by. For those listening too, by the way, I didn't even mention this in the beginning. The sound is different because it's a absolutely gorgeous day here in Northwest Indiana. And so I'm sitting outside enjoying it, doing this interview instead of sitting in my office. But to follow up on that question though, could you, where you're at, or in some of these areas that have outlawed short-term rentals, could you maybe do a duplex, or could you convert like a garage and live there full time if somebody wanted to stay there and wasn't like really interested in traveling for 6 months out of the year, and rent out other parts of their property as well?
Yeah. So if it's an official duplex in our town, that wouldn't be legal because it's two different units. But if it's an unofficial duplex, which is very common in Colorado, that could look like an upstairs house where you would live in. And then there's a basement unit that might have a separate entrance, something like that. Maybe it goes in through the garage or the kitchen and you can kind of wall it off a little bit. So people do that very often because it's the same address. So it's almost the same as you renting out a room in your house, which there's not a limit to. So that can be a great way to look at it. Another good thing is that if you're in a city that has regulations, very often outside of the city limits, there aren't, or it's more lenient. And so that can be a good way too, because there's not going to be as much competition in the city since it's restricted. So you could just be like right on the borders.